This is an unrehearsed program. The views expressed are those of the guests and not necessarily those of the producer. Today's topic:
Iran-India Alliance in Passion for Truth, award-winning program.
U.S. congressional members have written a letter warning to India expressing grave concern over its cooperation with Iran. Will India's dealings with Iran harm prospects for a nuclear deal that President Bush reached with India in 2005? We'll ask our panelists next. Devashish Ray, Bureau Chief, TV Asia, foreign correspondent, recipient of the Governor of Maryland's Award, retired Ambassador Jonathan Dean, advisor on international security issues affiliated with the Union of Concerned Scientists, Sardar Ganga Singh Dhillon, a researcher and a negotiator on critical issues affecting India and Pakistan, Dr. Dennis Warner from Pax Christi, the International Catholic Peace Movement. Dr. Warner has worked in more than 50 countries for a variety of international governmental and private organizations. And Dr. Gregory Stanton, President, Genocide Watch, also professor at the Mary Washington. Dr. Stanton is President of International Association of Genocide Scholars. Welcome you all. Starting with you, Devashish, what do you make of India's strengthening relationship with Iran? Is it a relationship or has it been exaggerated?
Well, the relationship has existed for a long time. There's no denying the fact. You also have to understand that like Iran, India enjoys a huge Shia population, so there are political concerns there too. When we talk about good relations, yes, India has maintained good relations with everybody, all the other countries, including Pakistan, especially the 3 wars. But the effort has been there to maintain relations with good relations with all the neighboring states. And Iran, being a producer of oil, it makes perfect sense to have a geopolitical strategic alliance or strategic relation with Iran. That makes perfect sense to me.
Ambassador Dean, India and Iran have been cooperating on military and energy issues very closely?
Yes, they have, but it's somewhat surprising that India has pushed ahead on this, even though Russia has some similar agreements. Because India is well aware of how sensitive the U.S. Congress is on this subject. And this 2005 agreement has not been implemented. There are several outstanding points. India hasn't signed a safeguards agreement with the IAEA covering that part of its nuclear facilities, which is supposed to fall under it. India has rejected a clause providing for termination of trade with the United States if it carries out another nuclear test. That's something that the Congress is pretty tough on. And India wants to have the right to reprocess nuclear fuel that it gets from the United States so it can use it again repeatedly in forming a lot of plutonium en route. So there are lots of unresolved questions, and the added impetus, the added weight of this problem about Iran seems to me to create quite a negative issue on the U.S. end. At the same time, we hear from India that there's a lot of impatience about the United States stand on this treaty. So I'm wondering whether this additional incident won't mean the indefinite delay and thus the end of this particular treaty. As an arms controller, I hope so.
Sardar Dhillon, India wants to keep its nuclear options open, but if it tests again, the deal is off?
No, I don't think so. So far the letter of the Congress is concerned. Congress is the watchdog of one of the fourth very important part of the administration. It's their job to keep an eye what administration is doing. So for India's relation Iran are concerned, they are historically are very, very long relations with India for centuries old. And India is energy hungry, and the gas supply can only be available to them from Iran. So as important as the nuclear energy is, the same importance carries by the gas. So they would like to keep their relations.
Dennis, will their close ties be a factor when Congress votes on the final language of the nuclear agreement, if it is true?
Well, I'm not sure how Congress will vote, but I'm guessing the close ties will not change drastically because the United States very much needs India. India is the world's largest democracy. The U.S. at this point in time sees India as a counterweight to China. We have strong common links with India, language and so on. And so I think in many senses the U.S. will, you might say, cut India more slack than we would other countries. And in any event, the United States in the current administration has not ever found an international treaty that it was willing to uphold in terms of its own behavior. So I don't think the fact that there is a treaty supporting something or opposing something will have much effect on the U.S. relationships with India.
But Greg, India has not, as you know, signed the non-proliferation treaty. What if it sells weapons to Iran?
That would be very serious, I think. The non-proliferation treaty, however, for India, I think was seen by India as a barrier to its having nuclear weapons that it knew Pakistan was also developing. So it was an understandable position for India to have, given that that historic confrontation. I think Iran's effort to acquire nuclear weapons is considerably more dangerous because of the fact that their current Iranian leadership has expressed such what can only be called virulent hostility against Israel. And of course we know Israel is a nuclear power. The prospect of Iran having the possibility of a first strike against Israel is something that really makes my blood run cold. And so I think it's right that the U.S. is trying to get the IAEA and other, in fact all the members of the Security Council, are trying to get Iran to stop its nuclear enrichment program.
What do you make of what Greg said, Devashish?
Well, he does have a point, but on the contrary, when you mentioned about India not signing the non-proliferation treaty, look at the countries who have, and look what they have done. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, a non-proliferation treaty is a treaty which really nobody gives a damn about. But having said that, again, what you should understand is, again, when you measure the ties between India and Iran, India and the U.S., post 9/11 has changed a lot of things, and that is why the foreign policy of the U.S. has also changed substantially. If you try and isolate U.S. With the rest of the world, you will feel that the isolation keeps on growing more. That is why what he said is that the U.S. needs some strategic allies in certain corners of the world, and India being the numero uno ally. But let me tell you again that India has very impeccable credentials when it comes to non-proliferation, and I see no reason for it to change its policy towards that. So I think that it's in safe hands right now.
I think there's another factor here. International treaties work if the major powers support them.
Sure.
Now, we've got the Non-Proliferation Treaty where both India hasn't signed it, the U.S. has signed it, China signed it, France has signed it, UK has signed it, but they're not adhering to it. Mm-hmm. One of the major issues in the Non-Proliferation Treaty is the countries with nuclear weapons would make efforts to eliminate their stockpiles of nuclear weapons. Now, none of the nuclear powers that we know of have done so. So the treaty is something of a sham, and if treaties become the way that large countries hold a club over small countries, but at the same time don't follow the conditions of the treaty, then the treaties become, after a while, meaningless.